So we're going to take a look at the game gear that I picked up in the handheld console lot that you saw in my December 2020 pickups video. If you haven't seen it yet, basically I picked up a small lot, came with a Game Gear and a Game Boy. Seller said that screens were having issues. The Game Boy turned out it was working just fine. It just had a cracked screen lens and a cracked shell. The Game Gear, though, was not working. And here I'm pointing out the fact that it's missing screws, which means someone's probably been inside of here. But we'll take a deeper look soon. But this one definitely did not work. If you look at the battery contacts, you'll see that they're copper. There probably was some battery damage or perhaps capacitor leakage that had corroded them, and the nickel plating on them had removed itself. I'm showing the screen now. At first I thought the screen was delaminating, but it's not. That's actually just the rubber tape foam adhesive thing that holds the screen to the casing. So when I had my pickups video, I thought that the screen was delaminating, but that was my mistake. Now I'm just going to begin the process of disassembling it. You will need a game bit to remove the top screw that you can see where the cartridge slot is. The rest of the screws are just standard Phillips. Now when you separate the two shells, be careful because there are cables connecting the two halves, the main PCB, the main board basically, and then there are two separate boards, one for power and one for audio. The one you see at the top right is the audio board, the one at the top left is the power board. Now I'm looking at this and I see some corrosion over on the right side there where there's just like a bare copper pad there. That's so that when the case is closed, it doesn't crush any components. But it looks like this thing was already recapped, which makes me more concerned as to why it's not working. That's kind of why the title says Misadventures in Game Gear Repair Part 1, and there's a question mark there. There definitely some corrosion damage, but the fact that this was already recapped and it still doesn't work concerns me, because was something fried? Are there broken traces? I don't know. But that's part of the fun and part of the challenge of repairing retro stuff. Even if this Game Gear had not been opened at all, the Game Gear has a known issue where the capacitors fail over time, and you need to replace them. And you pretty much need to replace all of them. The ones on the soundboard are a little more resilient. They're surface mount electrolytics. The ones on the power board are through-hole electrolytics. And the ones on the Game Gear itself, I'll show a picture of it since this one doesn't have it. They're surface mounts, but they're also electrolytic capacitors similar to the ones in the soundboard. They're just encased in a plastic shell and bent 90 degrees, so they kind of look like they're solid-state surface mounts, but they're not. Repair kits that you usually get for these just give you your typical electrolytic capacitors, and you just solder the legs onto the pads. They don't go through holes because there are no holes for them to go through. So, taking a look at the power board first, since there's a power issue with it, I'm going to take a look and see if they replaced the capacitors on there. They probably did, since they did the rest of it, but you never know. I also want to check to see if there's any other kind of damage or anything like that. Sorry for the blurriness. The camera's having trouble focusing for some reason. So I'm looking, and it does look like it was resoldered. There's a little bit of flux left over, although the soldering itself doesn't look too bad. Maybe I just need to touch it up. I'm not sure yet. And these are good capacitors. They are Rubicons, so they're not, some cheap generic stuff off the shelf. But even if they were, it shouldn't matter just because of the fact that even cheap new capacitors are still going to work, at least for a while. So, in the soundboard though, it was definitely recapped because these are not the surface mount electrolytics, so I'll have to take a look and see. A little bit of corrosion on the board, might need to clean it off. But I don't think it should impact it powering on. I don't know for sure, though. It's possible that there's some sort of check in the Game Gear that if the soundboard isn't working, it might not work. So, yeah, but these are definitely new capacitors, and you just need to check the traces. Need to check the solder joints, especially in the upper left corner there. Those two capacitors are really close to each other. There's a possibility there's a bridge there, so we'll have to take a closer look. A little bit of corrosion on some of the solder points, which suggests that the capacitors did leak, and the previous person working on this, whether it was the seller or someone else, did not clean that corrosion up before they put new capacitors on. It's a little bit of dry solder joints, which would usually indicate corrosion that has not been cleaned up. So now they did not do a screen mod or replace it or anything because it's got the original fluorescent light in there. Got the original screen, more than likely. As long as the screen itself works, it's not a big deal. It would be nice to put a new screen in here, but let's do one thing at a time. And so now I'm just going to remove the rest of the screws to get to the board itself so I can examine it further, see if there's any damage on the other side of it. I'm going to make sure that, you know, this isn't going to be a fruitless endeavor. So there is a little bit of corrosion though. You can see right there by the contrast wheel. So that's going to have to be cleaned up. And a little bit there as well. Not sure. That looks more like it could be liquid damage, but it's hard to say for sure. And I'm just going to go over it. I'm just going to retouch some of the solder points just in case they didn't, you know, completely take. So kind of have mixed feelings about, you know, the fact it was already done. On one hand, I don't have to recap it, but on the other hand, if it wasn't done right or the wrong capacitors were used or whatever, then I'm going to have some issues. So I'm going to grab a AC adapter, plug it into the power board, and just check some voltages out just to see if there's any issues. Now, mind you, I'm not an electrical engineer, so I don't necessarily know what I'm doing, but this does, though, appear to be a VA1 board, so it even says so on the PCB itself on the left there. But it's a VA1 board, so a lot of the mods that exist out there and a lot of the kits are designed for the VA1 and VA2 boards. We're going to take a look at the power board. According to the schematic here, you've got 5 volt, 5 volt, 3 ground pins, a 1.28 volt, a 9 volt, and a 34 volt. That last pin down, the 34 volt one, is for the screen. I'm going to check for anything shorting the ground first. And it doesn't appear that any of them actually do. Nine volt, though, is shorting the ground, which is probably not good, so we'll have to take a look and see. It's not supposed to be. I'm just trying to follow a trace to see where it goes. Sorry, it's not on camera. I need to get a closer look at it. Now, those of you eagle-eyed people might be able to see what the issue is right away if I flip the board back around. But we'll go on a little bit further with it. A little bit of corrosion on the board, though. I'm going to try to clean some of it off just in case. That shouldn't be causing a short necessarily, but... And I'm looking, and I noticed, those of you might have noticed earlier, one of the capacitors is not installed correctly. Stripe on the capacitor typically means negative, and it usually corresponds to a white marking on the PCB as well. Although some PCBs will be marked positive and negative, or just negative. So that's probably why 9 volt is shorting, or why the thing's not powering on at all. So and now I've got everything done, so I'm just going to test everything, and 9 volt is no longer shorting the ground. So possible the capacitor did not get damaged. I won't know. I might still have to replace it, but I'm going to put everything back together and do a quick test just to make sure. I'm not going to reassemble it completely. I'm just going to reattach all the components that I can. So And I'm going to go ahead and grab a game. The only game that I have, which is Sonic 2, which came with the lot. Oh, you saw that, right? The screen flashed on for a second, the power light came on for a bit, and then it went back off again. Now, that to me suggests that there's still a capacitor issue, or something else was shorted out, but I'm hoping it's just the capacitor, so... Yeah, see? Comes on and blips right off again. I'm just going over everything to see. I'm going to remove the soundboard in case there's a short on there. That one's installed backwards. That one's installed backwards. That one's installed backwards. That one's installed correctly. And I'm trying to get a good angle, but it's tough to do so. But one of the capacitors has some sort of a bodge wire hooked up to some bare copper. Not sure what's going on there. It's tough, but almost none of the capacitors are installed correctly. Lacy. Now, there's other concerns with the soldering on this board, which we'll get to later in this video, which is also what led to the Misadventures title. But for now, I'm going to try and re-solder everything to get them into the right polarity, right orientation, and see what we can do. Then we clean out some of the corrosion, clean out some of the flux, just in case. Unfortunately, there's not much else I'm going to be able to do with this board for the time being. So I'm going to just put some Kapton tape, and you notice I've got it in a few spots there just to make sure that the capacitors themselves aren't shorting against anything. Although it shouldn't short out, it could still do that. So I'm just putting some down just in case, because there are some smaller components underneath that you can't necessarily see in this video, but some service mount resistors, service mount capacitors, and I want to make sure that these new capacitors are not shorting out against anything, and that could be what's causing the Game Gear to not function. And then we'll just reinstall the soundboard and reconnect what we can, and I'm going to put the screws in just to hold it in place so it doesn't fall out. So here we'll set up the Game Gear tent and see if it comes on or not. You'll notice I don't have buttons installed right now, but I don't need them for this, just to do a power on test, so. Same thing. There's probably still a short somewhere. I'm going to have to look over the board itself. I'm also pointing out the fact that it's possible that there could be some shorter components. I'll have to check them later on and see. And here I'm just resoldering some of the capacitors. Some of them were also installed backwards. And here I'm pointing out the fact that one capacitor is installed correctly, and the one literally next to it is installed backwards. So more than likely, whoever worked on this before just put them on anyway. Maybe they thought that they were bipolar capacitors, where it doesn't really matter whether it's positive, positive, negative, negative. It's hard to say, you know. It's also possible they just didn't know what they were doing. They probably watched a few YouTube videos like so many of us have. It's like, oh, I can do that. I can't get to this capacitor because of the fact that the connector is there and I don't want to run the risk of melting it. It doesn't come off from that side of it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's a space issue or a cost saving or both. So I'm going to grab some Kapton tape and try to put it around the connector so it doesn't melt. Kapton tape is somewhat heat resistant, so a lot of people like to use it just to protect components. Okay, quick update here. I've been messing with some of the capacitors. I replaced a couple of them because I couldn't get any continuity on any traces or anything. And, well, here's the result of that. Nothing on screen that I can see, but there's sound and there's power, so... And actually, a quick update, the brightness wheel was a little crunchy, but it seems to be working now, so I'm going to keep working on this and see what else I can do with it. After some additional work off camera, I had to replace some of the capacitors that I reinstalled. I could not get any continuity in some of the traces, so I just said, screw it, I'm going to rip these capacitors out, put new ones back on. And I got it to power on to an extent, but there's sound, and there's power, and it's working. So now all I have to do is try and figure out how to reposition the capacitors so I can get the shell closed. Because the way they're installed now, the shell will not close. And so now what I'm going to do is I've tried to reassemble the case and everything after repositioning some things, but I can't completely get it closed up. So the reason I can't really do much with it is because of the fact that this other half of the shell, which has the power board and the soundboard specifically, the capacitors are too high for me to be able to close the shielding, to reinstall the shielding without it being bent or without me breaking it off. And the existing capacitor legs are too short, and I can't reuse them because I won't be able to reposition them. Now I have just standard ones, unfortunately. And I know I can probably just not install the shield. I don't want to. I want to leave the shield there. I want to try to have this as original as I can. So, and there's really not much I can do, so I'm going to have to just replace them. And what I'm probably going to do is either replace them with some new axials with longer leads so I can bend them over, or since the original soundboard had surface mounts, I'm probably going to end up just replacing them with that. So for the rest of this part of the video, though, I'm going to discuss trying to clean up some of the corrosion and try to figure out what to do about the battery terminals that are still corroded. And what I'm probably going to end up doing is just soaking the battery terminals in vinegar a little further just to clean them up, as well as leaving some vinegar over the corroded parts of the shell just to try to neutralize it. Now, the reason why there is some corrosion on there, it's not just stained. There is a somewhat of a metallic coating on the inside of the plastic shell. I think Sega used that as RF shielding instead of having a giant metal plate around the unit. And that's probably mainly due to the fact that it's got that little fluorescent bulb in there. You can see the shielding on the back of the screen to begin with, but FCC probably wanted some more shielding, so they sprayed the inside of the shell with this rust-colored coating. There's not going to be much I can do about that right now. I don't have anything. I'm probably just going to pick up a scan of Rust-Oleum and just paint over it just to hide that corrosion, but I want to neutralize it first. And so here, I don't have a video of it. Unfortunately, trying to solder on surface mount capacitors to this board ended in an epic failure. The pads came up on a couple of these capacitors when I tried to remove the old ones, and when I tried to install the new ones, they just came out. Now I can probably run bodge wires to each one to correct it. At least on the first one, the one on the bottom right, I know it leads to pin 1 on that little sound chip there. Unfortunately, there's a capacitor above it that also has a ripped pad, and I don't know where that trace goes to because it goes under the chip. I also can't remove the chip because there's so much corrosion that I cannot get the solder to melt to remove the chip itself, and I've even tried applying fresh solder and flux. It just isn't cooperating with me. So unfortunately, this soundboard might be a lost cause, and as such, this project is at a standstill. Now, fortunately, I was able to find a replacement soundboard on eBay. In fact, it's a new soundboard. It comes as either a kit, where you solder all the components on itself, or it comes pre-assembled. This is a brand new board, but it's designed, I believe, for just the VA1 and VA2. I don't believe it'll work on any other models. It might, I don't know, but I believe the description just says VA1 and VA2. I opted for the DIY kit. I wanted to practice some more of my soldering skills, and this has a combination of through-hole as well as surface mount components. So now again, I could try to salvage the board, like I said, with some bodge wires, but I'm having issues cleaning up the corrosion. And with that one capacitor in the middle where they have that bodge wire going to just like bare copper plating on the PCB itself, I'm just not sure. And I don't know what other damage could exist on here. It also kind of makes me a little bit leery about the rest of the capacitors on the main board itself, because some of the capacitors I can't move out of the way to get the shell to close, so I want to replace them with some surface mounts, whether I use electrolytics or the solid state ones. But if those pads are in just as bad of a shape as one on the soundboard, I'm going to have issues with it. So I'm going to have to put a stop to this video for now, unfortunately. Wait for that soundboard to come in. It's going to take a while for it to come in because it's coming from Europe, and there's a lot of delays right now at shipping because of everything going on in the world. And so this is part 1, but I don't know when part 2 is going to happen. Now you're probably wondering why I even bothered to release this video. Well, this channel it's designed, at least in my mind, I'm trying to design it in such a way so that it can hopefully be entertaining and somewhat educational to newbies as well as pros. Pros are going to look at this and see, oh yeah, there's a mistake, he made this and that's fine, and I hope that you leave comments below pointing out my mistakes so I can try to improve on them. But for novices like myself, you're going to run into issues like this. And this doesn't just apply to the Game Gear, this applies to anything you buy on eBay, whether it's an NES console or a calculator, or heck, maybe you're buying some, piece of china or something, and it comes and it's got a cracked handle on it or something. And these are the risks you take when you buy stuff that's used without being able to physically examine it. You kind of have to go on what the seller has, the pictures, the description, everything. And with this specific lot, this Game Gear, it's possible that the seller didn't know what was done to it. They probably bought it themselves on eBay, turned it on, it's like, oh, it doesn't work. Well, I'm not going to mess with it. I'll just throw it up there with the Game Boy that doesn't work. That turns out it did work. And that's it. So it's also possible that the seller was the one to try to recap it, got frustrated, said, I'm done with this. I'm not even going to bother. I'm just going to buy myself one that works. And so I wanted to release this video so that you guys can see that, yeah, you may get one that is like this, and you're going to have to determine whether you want to mess with it or not, or try to correct the mistakes that are there and hope for the best. A lot of times you watch YouTubers doing, oh yeah, capacitor replacement, no problem. Videos like 10 minutes long because they cut out a lot of it. You don't necessarily get to see a lot of these little details, so that's kind of why I wanted to release this video. And mind you, this original video would be over 3 hours long, it's been severely cut down, and even now it's approaching 40 minutes, that I'm going to try to cut down even further if I can. So that's why I'm releasing it. And again, this is part 1. Once a new soundboard comes in, I'll do a video on getting that soldered together. We'll test everything again, and then I will release part 2, or maybe that'll be part 3 by then, to just, wrap up this whole project. So that's it for this video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe if you haven't yet, but there's no obligation to do so. However, I do appreciate it if you do. If you didn't like the video, thumbs down, but please leave a comment below as to why, so I can use that to try to help improve things going forward. Otherwise, thanks all, and I'll catch you later.